We've got 2 hours blocked. I don't know that we'll take the whole 2 hours, but this is in anticipation of. This is in anticipation of the Phillips 66 case competition, which will be a sourcing style of project, case challenge. So they'll be giving you details about a product that they want to have sourced, and they're going to expect you to go through the process of sourcing that. Now, obviously, in my procurement class, that's a lot of what we talk about, right? But we do some case studies, and we do a variety of other things to dive a lot deeper into what's involved in this than what we're going to cover today. This is essentially Procurement Light or Procurement 101. So I'm jamming a semester's worth of procurement into less than 2 hours. But in reality, I'm not. In reality, what I'm doing is taking the 20% or so of the course that's really specifically germane to the kinds of things that I know Phillips 66 would be looking for, that will give you a taste of procurement. Not all the details. For that, you got to come to the show, right? This is just a movie trailer. Hopefully there'll be enough interested in this that you'll want to sign up for the show and actually come for the whole semester. As a little sales pitch for that course, by the way, I literally left at 5 o'clock. Left my class, my procurement class, where we had the final presentations of the semester-ending case competition, and so the final 4 teams presented. They're 4-person teams, and we had a sourcing project from Target, where we had a wooden and steel desk, like you've seen them. You might own something like it. The kind of thing you might get from IKEA or Wayfair or Target. And in this case, wood top, metal legs, and so on. And the project was to do a sourcing for that desk. And the final presentation happened today. Last 4 finalists, and so the first and second place teams they split $1,000. So first place team split $600, second place team split $400, and it was really good. It was an excellent project. They did a great job. So that's the type of thing we end up doing in my class. That is a little bit deeper extension of I think what's going on with this case competition. Okay, fair enough. So kind of get you excited about this, and maybe we'll go someplace. So let's start off by doing just the very basic aspect of this, which is from ISM, the Institute for Supply Management, and they are the professional organization that really drives procurement. And in that, they talk about procurement or purchasing, sourcing. Any of those 3 terms kind of works, but we can talk about some of the differences between those terms here in a minute. But if we talk about procurement, ISM would say it's the identification, acquisition, access, positioning, and management of the resources necessary for an organization to attain its strategic objectives. Let's break that down for just a second. So first thing we have to do in this process is we have to identify what those resources are that we need to do. In fact, I would even go a step further and back up one more step. You would say, first thing we need to do is figure out what are our strategic objectives. As an organization, as a company, what do we hope to accomplish? Are we going to be the price leader? Are we going to be the least expensive product out on the marketplace? Are we going to be the highest quality product out in the marketplace? Are we going to be an Apple MacBook? Or are we going to be an Acer low-cost laptop? They both serve arguably the same function. They're radically different positions in the marketplace, right? What are your strategic objectives? In Apple's case, very focused on high user compatibility, very strong aesthetic values, and so the buyer responsible for buying the outside skins, the polished aluminum skins for a MacBook, is going to be looking for a completely different thing than the person buying arguably the same product for Acer, where it's molded plastic, it's to protect, that's all it is, right? So it's low cost. We know it's going to get scuffed up. We don't really care, because what we're trying to do is get low-cost computing into someone's hands. And Apple, they're trying to share an entire computing, entertainment, music delivery experience. Different strategic objectives. So consequently, once we know that, now we say, all right, let's think about where that goes for us. First thing we have to do is identify what those resources are that we need to achieve our strategic objectives. So first step is figuring out, what do we need? What do we need? And then how do we get it? So we can either, in the case of Apple, they could go buy aluminum sheet, set up a factory, and they could have an Apple factory making their own skins. They could do that. They would be foolish to do that, because there are a lot of suppliers out there who can do that better and less expensively than Apple could. And that's part of the process, is for Apple to say, yes, but what are we good at? What can we do less expensively and better than others? So let's think about it. So that being the case, let's go acquire those aluminum skins. Let's make sure we have access to those skins. We got a good supplier who's consistent, who is good about continuity of supply, who will get it to us on time, make sure that we can get it, make sure that they have enough material, make sure that they have enough resources and capability and capacity to produce what we need when we give them a demand stream. And then we want to position it. Do we want that supplier to be in Thailand or Vietnam or in Guadalajara or in Round Rock? Or do we care? As long as if the supplier has a warehouse that has those skins available to the factory in a timely manner, and they can still be at the appropriate cost and the appropriate quality, then I don't care if they have a factory there or a warehouse there. We just need to make sure they're positioned properly to meet our needs. And then finally, we need to manage that process. We've chosen a supplier. We've negotiated a contract. We've figured out how much inventory we need to have. And you guys have all had 335. 3 of you have had me for 335. So you've got to think about, where is this the replenishment order up to model? Is this the economic order quantity model? How much are we going to keep on hand? That whole risk pooling discussion we had today. Do we have multiple warehouses? Do we have one warehouse? Do we have multiple suppliers? Do we have one supplier? All of those are questions we need to ask in this process of ensuring that we attain our strategic objectives. All right? So that was a long way of getting to kind of this slide, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but it's to recognize that if we look at the entire supply chain, we've got support activities, but we've got primary activities that go from the suppliers, the material coming in, the internal operations, which could be fabrication, where we're actually bending metal or machining metal, or it could be we get sub-assemblies and they come in and our internal operations are assembling it into a laptop. Or it could be someone else does all that stuff and it comes in and we just test it. Or it comes in and we just load the software. Or it could be they do all that stuff. And all it does is come into our warehouse and we inspect it, put a sticker on it, and we're ready to go. In which case, we then ship it out to maybe our warehouse, maybe our retailer. If we're Dell, maybe we ship it to Best Buy, and then Best Buy hangs onto it. It gets sold either direct from us or through a retailer, and then it ends up in the hands of the consumer. And if there are service issues, then we have to we kind of play that back. If they have to return it for some reason, and we call that reverse logistics, if it has to come back for service, we have to build that into our thinking as well. Those are the primary activities of the chain that goes from suppliers to consumers. Within that chain, you've got this idea of materials and supply management, which is basically everything that comes into our organization. It is the management of the relationships from our organization with all of the organizations that feed us. All right? Then there's the physical distribution and channel management, which is the internal movement and storage of that material. So going back to OM 335, it's that idea of we've got to order enough, we've got to keep it on the warehouse shelf, we've got to have it available, in the store, on the shelf, etc. That's happening here. And we got to get it into the hands of our retailer. That happens here. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about the supply management side. The supply management side, which is really what we're going to spend our time talking about the rest of this evening, is to look at understanding the resources we need to do our job, but we're not necessarily going to do ourselves. All right? The aspect of our either products or services that we acquire from other organizations, bring into our organization so that we can do our job to meet our consumers' need. So you can think of us, if we think of the supply chain or a supply river, if you will, we're looking upstream. We're a bridge. We're straddling that river. We're looking upstream. The downstream gets it into the hands of our consumer. And that whole picture, supplier to consumer, is the supply chain picture that we cover at McCombs throughout. But this problem, and the topic for tonight, is the upstream side. And within that, not going to spend a ton of time on this, but this is a value network slide that was developed by a company called Gartner Research. And they talk about this idea that we have multiple networks that are foundational in every organization. And those networks are design and product networks, demand networks, and supply networks. So demand networks would be more on the marketing side, understanding what the demand is out there. The product development side is, the engineering, R&D, etc. And the supply side is us, understanding how we manage that group of suppliers that sends material and services into us. And in a good organization, a world-class organization, these networks overlap so that we have interaction and discussion with marketing, with engineering, who, you can argue that marketing is our customer internally. You can argue that engineering is sometimes our customer, sometimes they're our supplier internally. But in all cases, in a world-class organization, these networks overlap. So in procurement, when we're making a decision about which supplier to use or what technology to buy, we're not doing that on our own, even though we're the ones making the buying decision. We don't do that in a vacuum. We get with our folks in engineering and say, what technology should we be looking at? What's the latest and greatest? Do you work with any suppliers that we ought to be talking to? Marketing, if we bring this new design technology in, can you sell it? Is there a need for it in the marketplace, or are we just playing with technology for technology's sake? We need to understand that overlap. And then within that, we have these functional skills: plan, source, make, deliver. That's something I want you to take note of right now, because that's something you're going to want to refer to in this case. If you can talk about SCORE, the SCOR model. Make note of that. SCOR model, the SCORE model. The SCORE model is based upon the premise that every organization has these functional skills of plan, source, make, deliver. And in this model, they've added to that, beyond plan, source, make, deliver, and added customer management, post-sales support, and new product development. And so the SCORE model, when you're doing your presentation, when you're doing your case analysis, what I want you to do is think about these different aspects of fulfilling the customer needs. And that is, first thing we're going to do is plan on this. And the planning is taking the demand stream from marketing, understanding what the market wants, because that's marketing's job. It's to go out there and do market research, focus groups, etc. Figure out, here's what the market wants. This is how much they want. This is how many they want. This is how much they're willing to pay for it. Right? That's marketing's job. Once they have that information, they take that demand information and they give it to us, or hopefully we've been working with them on it a little bit as a resource. And so we work with, on the planning side, we work with the demand side and say, all right, what is it we want? How much do we want? What are the specifications on that? Okay, Now let's plan on, what we need for that. And then we're going to source that. And the sourcing is that decision process of saying, do we make it ourselves? Do we assemble it? Do we test it? Or do we get raw material in and do everything ourselves? That's the sourcing decision. The sourcing decision is how. How and who and where is this going to get done? Could be done inside in our organization, could be done outside in a supplier organization, but that's the sourcing decision, right? Then we make it, and the making, that's after the decision's made, we have this raw material come in and we go, okay, now we got this raw material, or we have these fabricated parts, or we have these assemblies, or we have the entire thing done and we just bring it in and test it. Every organization is a little different on what constitutes the make part. And then we deliver. We get it into the hands of the customer. And then once the customer has it, we manage that relationship. And that might be that, that customer service, that reverse logistics. It's making sure that their customer needs are satisfied. That's all part of kind of the supply chain activity. We've got to do post-sale support, again, making sure that they're happy. And the new product development is kind of both the end and the beginning of the next cycle of the process, right? New product development says, okay, here's that product. It's been out there a few years now. Let's think about it. Does that meet all the customer's needs? No, those needs have changed. Okay, given that those needs have changed, let's develop a new product. Let's develop the next generation of that product. And let's talk to the sourcing folks and figure out who in the marketplace can help us with that. Who in the supply chain is out there that is a source for that material that we can work with. Okay, so it's an iterative process. It keeps going around. The SCORE model: plan, source, make, deliver. Drop those words when you're doing this case. All right. Here's the value chain example. This is think cereal. Think HEB. And HEB might be the grocer. You're the consumer. You're buying it from maybe Kellogg's, and Kellogg's is doing the packaging. They've got their own distribution center where they send it to you, the HEB. Kellogg's is buying the box from someone else. They get the pulp from the lumber company. They use labels in the packaging. Some of those labels use pulp that makes paper along with the corrugated box. If you go back up to the cereal, you got the packaging, but prior to that, you've got the processing where they're churning up the oatmeal, the oats to make oatmeal to turn it into Captain Crunch something or other. All right. So and then the farmer's actually growing the grain. Now we can get a lot more detailed than that, but that's at a pretty high level. Think about if you're the consumer, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers. You've got a 5-tiered supply chain there. And then you could even go back further with the farmer. Who's selling the farmer the seeds? Who's selling the farmer the tractor? And so on and so on. So you could get multiple layers. Every supply chain, even something really basic like this, is a minimum 5 layers and maybe more. So when we talk about managing the supply network, it's not just HEB talking to Kellogg's distributor. It's HEB maybe talking to Kellogg's distributor and Kellogg's, and the box manufacturer, International Paper, let's say, and Georgia Pacific, and so on. Right? You've got to manage that entire network. You don't just manage that first layer. All this is to say, this is an interdisciplinary function. So you don't just have purchasing, procurement people in a silo that don't have to talk to HR, don't have to talk to IT folks. They don't ever have to worry about interacting with finance and marketing. No, on the contrary, in order to be good, you've got to do all of those things. Which is one of the reasons I really like supply chain as a major and as a career, because to do this well, you have to speak the marketing language and work with marketers. You have to understand finance. You have to understand your accounting. You've got to know what's going on from a human resources perspective. You've got to have some sense of IT work and be able to do MIS kind of work. To do supply chain well, you've got to be able to do some of all of these things. And I like that interdisciplinary aspect of it. So in the purchasing process, we look at identifying those the user requirements. Again, you're not going to do something unless a user actually needs it. We're going to evaluate that need and figure out ways to meet that need, both effectively and efficiently. We're going to identify suppliers. Ensure once we've got those suppliers and we're working with them to have them provide goods or services, we want to make sure that they get paid according to the contract that we have. We want to make sure not only did our suppliers get paid, but did what the suppliers provide in goods or services actually meet our users' need. They are our internal customer. We have to double check, did they get their need met? And then it's a continuous improvement process. It's iterative. So this is critical. And if tonight there's any one slide that you focus on, this is the slide. This is the money slide. All right? And it is the 7-step process. Now, I guarantee you when you communicate really with anyone in the procurement and supply chain realm, but in particular oil and gas, actually I will tell you that this slide came from a consulting project I did with Halliburton. This is their version of the 7-step process, but everyone has the 7-step process. It's a well-known industry statement, industry cliche. And if you talk about the 7-step process, you're going to have instant credibility if you know what it is you're talking about. Okay? So know this slide. It's the money slide. So you can sum up everything we're going to talk about on this one slide. We start with the business case. What's the opportunity here? Let's define it. Are we talking about finding a new supplier to improve capabilities? Are we looking at a new product that we need to come up with an original supplier in the first place? Are we looking to resource to a different supplier to cut cost, to improve capability, whatever the case may be? By the way, we're going to make this slide deck available to you. There's a lot on here to try to copy all that. Don't spend your time doing that. But be on the lookout for this when you get it, all right? So there's a few things that we're going to do tonight that I want to make sure that you're aware of. So once you've defined the opportunity and understand the current situation, right here is the bulk of what we're going to talk about tonight. This one bullet, which is we're going to do a spend analysis, which is to understand where our money is going. Who's it going to? What are we getting for that money? Are we spending the right amount? Are all the different divisions in our organization spending the same amount or paying the same price for the same goods? Or do we have salespeople playing us off against one another? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we have a market analysis. And I'm going to get into a big amount of detail on that. That's critical to doing this well. And that is to say, if you're going to buy in the marketplace, then you need to really study the marketplace and understand what's going on in that market. So I don't know if you've had the opportunity to be exposed to Porter's 5 Forces yet or not. Porter's 5 Forces or SWOT analysis. Does that sound familiar? All right, so we got a little bit of that. Good. We'll talk about that some more. That's the starting point for figuring out what's going on in the marketplace. But for instance, if you're going to buy electronics, and let's say you're going to buy microprocessors, if you walk into suppliers, you're going to go talk to Micron and Qualcomm, Freescale, Intel, Samsung, and you don't know the first thing about buying microprocessors. You don't know anything about microprocessors. You don't know anything about the technology. You don't know what their cost drivers are. You don't know if prices are going up or are they going down. If you don't know that, you will make bad decisions. So this market analysis part is fundamental to being able to do this well. Once we've done a spend analysis and a market analysis, spend analysis is that internal, market analysis is external. once we've done that to understand what we're doing and what the market's doing, then we can start looking at commitment from subject matter experts, the engineers, let's say, or the marketing people or operations people. We can look at coming up with a project plan, and then we start getting into this next step, which is analyzing the spend. So here's the spend analysis, but here's the guts of it. What did we spend our money on? Where did we spend it? Who did we spend it with, et cetera? We'll talk more about that. Once we've done that, we'll assess the requirements. We'll understand what the customer wants, what technologies they need, what specifications they have, how many they want, et cetera. How long a contract we anticipate, how long we anticipate this need going on. Is it a one-time buy? Like we're building a bridge. We're going to build one bridge. That's all we need to worry about. Or we're sourcing parts for an automobile that we're going to be building for the next 7 years. So on one hand, we're going to buy stuff one time with that bridge. On the other hand, we're going to buy stuff on an ongoing basis for 7 years, at least. So different way for us to approach the marketplace and approach the suppliers. Then we're going to do this TCO model. TCO stands for Total Cost of Ownership. And that's an important concept for you to know. We don't have enough time to go into really deep detail about that tonight, but we're going to work on that. We're going to give you at least a sense of what it is. All right, and so give you something along those lines. So then we do the market analysis. What's going on in the marketplace? What are the trends? What are the main cost drivers of what it is you're buying? Is it a labor-intensive marketplace? Is it commodity-intensive? Are there a lot of players? Are there 2 or 3 big players that battle it out in the marketplace? Or are there a bunch of fragmented little players with intense competition? Is it a monopoly? Is oil and petroleum products a major commodity source that drives their pricing? So if you're looking at plastic parts, for instance, you need to understand what's going on with oil prices, because oil prices directly impact plastic prices because it's a key commodity input. If you didn't know that, you would make stupid decisions about buying plastics. If you didn't realize, all right, we're in an oil downturn that's starting to come up. So knowing that over the next year to 2 years, we expect oil prices to come back up, probably break back into the 70s or 80s per barrel, knowing that means, well, maybe when I'm negotiating with a plastic supplier, I ought to be thinking about maybe getting into a longer-term contract and locking them into a low price now, because their prices are very likely to go up over the next couple of years, because the main ingredient to their product is about to have price increases. If you didn't do your market analysis, you wouldn't know that. You wouldn't make a good decision. Okay? And then, so completing the market intelligence, like tying that all together. We've got to develop a strategy based upon that. We have to develop a strategy that's consistent with our corporate strategy, like the Apple example, right? So I don't want to go out and buy aluminum skins from the low-cost supplier that's running some factory in the outskirts of Taipei, Taiwan, with dirt floors and no quality inspection, no bad tooling, and they abuse their workers. Even though I can get it a lot cheaper from them, that's not consistent with what we want to do with our organization. I like to use the example, and I'll come back to it several times tonight. I like to use the example of General Electric and their aircraft engine business group. Right? Guarantee you've ridden on an aircraft that's been powered by General Electric jet engines. Right? They're the leader in the industry, and if you're if you work in procurement at General Electric and you're responsible for buying ceramics, then there are a couple things that you need to know. One is you're a major player in the ceramics marketplace worldwide. And given how you use ceramics in the production of aircraft engines, you know that quality is the bigger issue. Quality and technology is the bigger issue over cost. because it can be the cheapest stuff around, but if it fails, people die, right? And that's not a good thing. So the emphasis for the procurement people buying ceramics at General Electric Aircraft Engine Business Group is we need to have the very best technology, the highest quality, so that, with a really dependable supplier. Yeah, we want to get our best value for the money, but that's like the third or fourth item. We've got to get these other things right, because if we don't, people die. And so that becomes a much bigger issue. Understanding the alignment between our sourcing strategy and the corporate strategy. And again, I'll show you some more on that a little bit later. Then we go to the point of identifying all the potential suppliers. We narrow that down based upon an evaluation strategy, and you got to figure out what it is we're going to measure these suppliers on. And then we engage with the suppliers. We solicit responses from them. We try to get information from them. We decide, maybe we decide upon some very detailed specifications, and then we'll send out a request for quote from those to get a quote back on those products with that specification set. We'll evaluate those. We'll pick one or two or three that we want to get into detail with. We'll negotiate contracts with them. We'll set up those contracts, sign the agreements, and then we have to decide how we're going to measure their performance, maintain their performance by managing that. So there's your 7-step process. Know it, love it, embrace it. 7 steps. All right? So this is, I tell this every time I use this slide. I hate this slide. It's ugly, it's messy, and unfortunately I haven't really yet come up with an alternative that is substantially better. So, but let's walk through this together. This is purchasing 101. So, which is to say, and some of this is going to sound familiar. First thing we do is identify the need. Okay, we've talked about that before. We identify that need, come up with specifications, or maybe a statement of work if we're talking to consultants. We'll figure out if there's a product requirement, maybe there's a new product that we're developing. We'll understand, is this an ongoing purchase, or does it come out of our material resource planning cycle? Maybe there's a requisition or purchase requisition. We'll talk about that in a second. And so we take that need, we'll go and say, do we have an approved supplier that will meet that need? And if there is, then we'll go and into our system, and it's usually an automated system. It can be online. We can walk through that pretty straightforward. If there's not an approved supplier, if it's a small amount, and we're not going to spend $50 or $100 of staff time to buy a $15 pen. All right, so just go buy a pen. Right, that's fine. But if it's not a small amount, if it's a larger amount, then we say, all right, we've got a lot of them. Is this complex? Is this a complex requirement? And if it's not, well, okay, yeah, we'll approve the purchase. Just go do, right? Copy paper or something that yeah, we're going to buy a lot of copy paper, but is it in line with the market? Yeah, it is. Go ahead, done. All right. Let's not spend $200 of staff time to save $50. So that's what this is about. But if it is a complex requirement, you can see where we're kind of going. We can keep moving our way over to the right here. Then we have 3 steps. And these are important steps for you to understand, so you need to make note of this. First thing we would do is an RFI, which is a request for information. That is the purchasing equivalent of going on to Match.com and looking at the profile, right? So I want to know some information. Where are you located? How many machines do you have? How many employees do you have? What are your capabilities? What are the normal products that you ship out of your organization? Or what kind of services do you normally provide? You're not asking for prices. You're not asking for, a particular part. You just want, what is it that you do? What are you good at? What do you want to do? Right? So that's your initial looking at the profile on Match.com. Right? Then we have an RFP, a request for proposal. Now it's, all right, we're thinking of developing this product, and we know that we don't have all the capabilities we need to do this. Do you have the capabilities to participate in this with us? And would you, and if you do, would you be interested in working with us on developing this new product? And can you show us examples of other products like this that you have done? Can you show us that you have the capabilities to do this particular type of product? Again, we're not asking necessarily for a price. We're looking for specific capabilities as it relates to a particular product or service. And what kind of timeline would you be looking for to help us develop this new product or bring this new product to market? And then finally, as we get more detailed, we say, we know we want to buy widgets. In fact, we want to buy a widget that meets the ASTM standards .14396, version 2015, and we want to buy 15,000 a month, delivered twice a month to 5 different locations across the country. These are the addresses, but very detailed. Highly specific. Give us your best price. Give us your quote. RFQ, request for quote. But when you do that request for quote, you have to provide a great deal of detail about what it is you're asking for. So that's, RFQ is not just kind of arm waving and, hey, we're kind of thinking about doing widgets and we want to do a lot. Can you give me a ballpark number? That's not an RFQ. That's maybe a request for a proposal. If you said, oh, look, we want to do a widget similar to this. We haven't come up with a final specification yet. Could you tell us whether you've done widgets like this in the past? And if we were to do somewhere between 50 and 200,000, could you kind of give us a price range that might go along with it? That's more of a request for proposal. Request for quote, ASTM standard 19. Blah, 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 blah. We want 15,000 delivered at 5 locations every other week. And we anticipate this being a 24-month need. And blah, 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 right? Very specific very with a particular quote in mind. That process of request for information, request for proposal, request for quote is really important for you to know. Then we're going to evaluate suppliers that come out of that, particularly on a request for proposal, but sometimes on a request for quote, we might go back in and say, okay, you quoted this number, but if we change the specification, could we negotiate that number? Or what if we change this volume? Could we negotiate that differently or whatever? And then we'll select a particular supplier. The rest of this gets down to once you've decided on something and you've got a contract in place, you could have a contract, and then you have, under that contract, you have a purchase order, a PO, right? The purchase order is kind of like the trigger. Contract is the gun. The purchase order is the trigger, right? And so you've got, you can't fire the bullet if you don't have a gun, right? So you got this contract, that's your overall, and then the purchase order is the particular transaction, the specific transaction. I want to buy 15,000 this month. I'm going to do the purchase order to do 15,000. Next month I want 18,000. I'm going to write another purchase order. It's under the same contract. Specifications are all there. Everything's the same. I'm changing the volume, or I'm changing the location of where they're delivered or whatever. That's the purchase order. So the purchase order is the transactional activity. the purchase contract is the overall agreement that that overrides everything. Make sense? Okay. Purchase release would be similar to a PO. That would be more along the lines of there are no changes. We're just that's just something that says, okay, ready for another delivery. Ready for another delivery. It's more of a delivery flag than it is a purchase order is an actual order. The rest of this comes in with this idea that there are three. If you're talking with accountants, they have this wonderful thing they call the three-way match, and every accountants love the three-way match. And the three-way match is you get your purchase order, right? That's the order out to the supplier saying, I want the widget. And then you have the invoice saying, I shipped your widget, here's my bill, please pay me. And then you have a bill of lading or a packing slip that says, oh, we received the widget. All right? So you got to have all three. Purchase order that I ordered it, invoice that they asked us to pay, bill of lading or packing slip that says you actually got it and we received it. So all three of those have to line up, and then at that point when they match up, then you make the payment. Okay? This is a process this is fundamental to pretty much, this is basic blocking and tackling on purchasing. This is very transactional. What supports that is this, the purchase requisition. There are two, when you guys have my class someday, we'll get into, there are a variety of war stories and everything around purchase requisitions versus purchase orders. And those of you who have me know I like to tell war stories. But what it gets down to is two documents. Purchase order is the external document. That is it can function actually as a contract to the suppliers between you, the company, and the supplier. It is saying, we will pay you X amount of dollars if you will send us Y objects on this date at this time. So it's the specific contract ordering goods and saying this is what we'll pay. The requisition is an internal document that should never, ever go out to the supplier. It often does in error, but the requisition should be an internal document only that says so let's, for argument's sake, let's say Diana worked in my department and she wanted to buy 1,000 cases of water, right? And so the requisition process would be, she fills out the requisition that comes to me and says, I want to go buy 1,000 cases of water. And I would look at that as the manager and say, here's my budget. Why, yes, I do have in my budget that we're going to buy 1,000 cases of water, and the money's there. Requisition approved. Please go to purchasing, which is what it is. So creating the requisition, Diana created the requisition saying I need 1,000 cases of water. Comes to the manager says, yes, we're ready for that. We have that in our budget. I approve that requisition. Now please go to purchasing, who takes that requisition and says, the manager's approved it, there's money in there, great. So if we make the commitment to the supplier and they fulfill that commitment, we've got the money backing it up. Cool, all right? So and once that's done, then at that point and not before, we will generate the purchase order. And that purchase order then is what we just talked about in last, where it goes out to the supplier and says, we want 1,000 cases of water, 12-ounce bottles, preferably clean and drinkable, according to this specification, all that stuff. And we want it delivered to this location by this date, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that goes to the purchase order, or the purchase order goes to the vendor. They will, once the vendor gets it, they'll create the product and deliver it. We'll receive it. we'll get a copy of that purchase order and we'll acknowledge the receipt. And that's when we'll then and then they'll send us an invoice saying, I sent 1,000 cases of water. And so we'll take, so the acknowledge, that's the bill of lading or purchase order or shipping order. That says the shipping dock, it came, they sign off on it, we received it. We'll take that, we'll match it with the invoice and the purchase order, and then we'll send them a check. Right? That's a process that you should know. It's just an important, it's kind of a basic business process. And what happens a lot of times is, let's say that Diana is a really talented, really aggressive engineer who has a new product that she's developing and she wants to get it done ahead of schedule. So she's already got a supplier in mind that she wants to work with. So she gets the purchase requisition, fills it out, comes to me, and I'm the engineering manager. Yep, we've got that in our prototype budget. That works. Go ahead. And she says, oh, but those guys in purchasing take forever. So I'm just going to go out to the supplier and say, here's what I want you to make, and here's the purchase requisition number. We're getting the PO, but you start working on this now, right? And just go do that. And guys, it happens every single day. And as a former engineer, I will tell you, I did it every single day. Then I saw the light. But it is a common problem. And requisitions get handled as order documents all the time, and they're not. They're internal documents. A supplier should never see a requisition. Now, I don't know that any of that language is going to show up in this case, but it's an important distinction for you to make. And the reason I kind of harp on it is, trust me, if you're doing your presentation during the case competition in front of a bunch of purchasing executives from Phillips 66, and you happen to say requisition instead of purchase order, give up now. Just walk out of the room because you're done. All right? They will write you off. So that's an important distinction. Thank you for smiling as I used you in an example, Diane. All right, so a couple of key objectives in purchasing. Number one is having supply continuity. You got to get this stuff there when we want it, when we need it. We want to manage that process, which is that ugly flow chart that I showed you earlier. That's an ugly, ugly process, but someone's got to manage it. That's our job. We want to have a good supply base, a supply base that's capable, who can produce our goods in a quality manner in the age of corporate social responsibility, do so without using slave labor, without abusing their workers and keeping their workers safe, but also making sure that they have the capability. So if we see new technology coming along, we want to work with our suppliers to make sure that they have the investment capabilities to stay current on technology and those sorts of things. Make sure that internally we're working with engineering, we're working with marketing and finance and so on, that what we do supports the organizational goals, a la GE, ceramics, etc. Lowering our ceramics cost by $200 and then causing a quality problem that causes an airliner to blow up is not really cost savings, right? So, and then making sure that those strategies support one another. Okay, cool. This is sort of high level kind of stuff. So we talked about this: RFI, RFP, RFQ. All right, done. All right. All right. So we talked about a couple of the key things that we need to make sure that we are aware of here. Number one on this list is getting into developing these category strategies, and the first step to doing that is a spend analysis, right? So we got to figure out what the resources are for the data, validate the savings that we have in our process, and then integrate those. So that's kind of the high level. Here's at the at the detail level what we're talking about. And essentially what we're talking about when we say a spend analysis is that we're going to download the transactions from an accounting system. So you go into SAP or Oracle, I2, some of these accounting softwares, and what we'll be looking for, you end up going to the accounting department saying, over the last year, please give me a record, a transaction record of every dollar we spent. Who we spent it with, who authorized the PO, who authorized the requisition, where did it ship to, how many did they buy, what did they, what was the price per item. And then you look at that, and the first step, at least from my perspective, the first step is you do a massive pivot table. That's the magic thing in Excel, is you do a pivot table and you start figuring out what are the different categories, who are the different suppliers. And you've got, here are the kinds of questions you ask. What do we spend our money on? Any of the accounting folks that prepare the balance sheet and income statement would say, we know our purchased goods and materials were $135.62 million last year. We know that. We have the transaction records to say that. Okay, then our question is, all right, $135.62 million on what? With whom? And so we have to figure out, did we receive the right amount of products and services based upon what we paid for them? In other words, if we issued a purchase order for widgets, where on that purchase order we said we're going to spend $10 per widget, and then 6 months into the contract, all of a sudden the purchase orders come back, or the invoices come back, and instead of charging us $10 a piece, they charge us $12.50. They just change the number on the invoice. Well, that stuff slips through the system all the time, right? And so we have to go in and say, hang on. Our contract says 10. Well, yeah, but we had a price increase, so we took it up to $12.50. Not without my approval, you didn't. But, I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it happens. The reality is that kind of stuff happens. They'll just change the invoice, say, oh, price increase, here you go. And sometimes accounting will just pay it. Because, they obviously they don't skim through every single invoice and deep dive on every single invoice and double check everything. Oftentimes what they'll do is say, is it within an acceptable is it within an acceptable range of error? And if it is, they'll just pay it. Suppliers know that. Now, a supplier with integrity doesn't do that. And I would like to say that every supplier with whom we engage has high integrity, but you would know that I was lying if I said that, right? So we have to be careful. Part of the way we do that is a spend analysis. So we'll ask the question, did we get the right number of products? If we ordered 100, did we get 100? Or did we pay for 100 but we only got 92? That's the more likely thing. A price change happens, but not all that often. What will happen is you order 100, you get 92, and you get charged for 100. That's the kind of stuff that'll tend to happen. Were there suppliers that received the majority of the business? I've got 4 suppliers of widgets. And I pay them all $10 per widget. But this guy gets 80% of the business. How come? Well, let's figure that out. Well, the quality of the widgets from supplier A is vastly superior to the other 3. So of course we're going to give them. In fact, maybe we should delete the other 3 and give them all the business. Or maybe it's because the owner of that company is a golfing buddy with the purchasing manager at that plant. Be good to know. Sometimes it happens. A lot of times it doesn't, but it'd be good to ask the question. Did the suppliers charge us the right price across all the divisions? So if I've got 5 plants and they all need widgets, is this plant paying $10 for this widget? That plant over there has a separate contract with the same supplier to buy widgets, but they're paying $13. You would think, right now I can see in your faces, you're like, well, that's just stupid. Why would anyone do that? Guarantee you that every large organization that exists. every large organization, even ones with really good procurement purchasing activities, because it's the kind of thing that happens. And there are classes in salesmanship, classes in how to improve your sales penetration, and that actively promotes the idea of kind of a divide and conquer. If you're going to sell to General Motors, better to treat this plant as one organization and this plant over here as a different organization, and try to get the best you can get over here, and then start from scratch over here, as opposed to negotiating $10 over here and then coming over and say, hey, I know you're willing to pay 12, but we've got a contract over here for 10. Why don't we just add you to that volume? That's what the General Motors folks would love to do. That's what I would tell you as a procurement organization, procurement professional, I would expect you to do. And I will tell you that the sales folks are actively working against doing that, because they want to optimize the individual activities, right? Let's see. Did divisions spend stuff that was correctly budgeted for? So when Diana came in and she's got that one supplier that she wants to get prototypes from, did that prototype purchase order turn into a $5,000 purchase order when we only had $3,000 in that budget? Now that's not my concern necessarily in purchasing, because it got approved. The purchase requisition got approved by the manager. But it is my problem if the manager approved $3,000 and then I wrote the purchase order for $5,000, screwed up her budget, and it was my screw up. So you've got to make sure that you cover that. Other opportunities to combine volumes. So if I've got I've got 5 divisions, they're all buying widgets. These guys buy 1,000 widgets, so they pay $10 a piece. These guys buy 200 here, 50 there, 30 over there. And because they're low volume, they're paying $15, $16, $18 a piece. That's when you want to go to the widget supplier and say, why don't we use that? Let's combine all these, and now instead of 1,000, now we're talking about 2,000 when we combine all these others to this. How about a discount on that, and we'll share that price across every. Those are the kinds of things you can do, and you do that with a spend analysis. This is not a good slide. I got to delete that slide. So here's the ways you would do this, and this is going back to that kind of pivot table kind of approach to things. First thing you do is go and sort by commodity. So let's say, safety items, office supplies, drill bits, shop rags, widgets, and then we can start clumping, by that, and then within the commodity, all right, we're into widgets now. We've got all these other commodities, but right now, even though we're spending $135 million with everybody, let's get down to this $18 million that we're spending on widgets. Now we can get into, all right, who are the top 10 suppliers of widgets? Where did that $18 million go? And then we can also go back and say, we've got 26 widget suppliers, but we've only got 3 shop rag suppliers. We've only got 1 supplier of lubricating oil, and we spend $4 million on that. Maybe we should have some competition in that. So again, you find all this out by doing a spend analysis. So these are the kinds of things it's pretty straightforward. Sort by suppliers per commodity, chart the top 10, descending. Who's our biggest supplier? Who are the little suppliers? If we got 10 suppliers, do we need 10 suppliers? We could probably get this done with 3 or 4 suppliers. And if we did that, we could take the volume from number 5 through 10, move it up to number 1 through 4, get a volume discount and lower the price. That's the power of this kind of analysis. You start looking at this going, I've got all these little guys. I got 18 suppliers all doing a little bit of business. What if I took all of that, instead of $40 million spread across 20 suppliers, what if I took that and I picked my best 2 or 3 suppliers, and I took that whole 20 million and said, now instead of a few $100,000 or a couple $1 million, I'm going to offer you a $12 million contract. Let's talk, now let's negotiate. Let's get that price down. That's what it gives you, the opportunity for negotiation. Any questions, by the way? I haven't been taking any questions. I've been kind of verbalizing too much. All right. Pareto analysis. You guys understand what a Pareto analysis is? Have you heard that? It's basically doing a descending. It's largest spend, smallest spend. You can kind of ignore the thing. It is, all right, where are we spending our money? Well, we're spending our money in these 2 areas. Where do you want to put your efforts? I think I'll put my efforts here. You could sort by top 10 suppliers. Top 10 suppliers. Who are the good, why are these guys getting all the business? Because what you would do is you would look at, all right, these are my top 3 or 4 suppliers. Now I want to go back and do another Pareto analysis or a pivot table analysis that says, if this is my top supplier, this person better be the lowest price. If they're providing the same goods, if they're providing identical widgets, and if this guy is the biggest supplier, then if they're not charging us the lowest price, we got a problem. I need to understand why. So, those are the kinds of things, those are the kind of questions you can ask, all right? Let me go back to this. It's 6:45. I've still got stuff I need to cover. I would love to dig deeper into a spend analysis, but bottom line is this. I know that Phillips 66 is going to give you probably an Excel spreadsheet with a transaction list, right? And you're going to need to do this sort of analysis. So if you don't know how to do pivot tables, you should learn how to do pivot tables. You can learn in about 5 minutes. It's not hard. But things like VLOOKUP, things like doing your data sorts, high to low, those sorts of things. This is fundamentally a spend analysis is playing what-if games in Excel. That's essentially what this is about, right? So get your data in there and then start playing with it. Who are our top 10 suppliers? Who are our top 10 suppliers by commodity? Who are you do things like look for differences in units of measure. For instance, you might get one supplier that only supplies in sets of 10, another supplier that sells individually. So when you look at the price, you see one that's selling sets of 10 and the price looks off the charts. Holy cow, how are we even doing business with these guys? And then you realize, oh, but wait, we're getting, it's only 5 times the cost, but we're getting 10 items for this one that's only one. It's that kind of stuff that shows up in a spend analysis. So look at units of measure. Make sure you're comparing apples to apples, barrels to barrels, unit to unit, skid to skid, dozen to dozen, that kind of stuff, right? Make sure that's good. Okay. This is another way of stating the 7-step process, except this has got 5. But I want to keep coming back to this. It's an iterative process. You build a step at a time as you work through this, but you always start off with a plan. You always start off with an alignment of strategy. You always have an understanding of the market and drive to that. And then you get into choosing your suppliers and negotiating. Oh, good. Porter's 5 forces. So you guys said that you had like nominal exposure to this, right? So, but you kind of understand it? Okay. I won't spend a ton of time on this. Porter's 5 forces represent either an industry or a company. But if you were to look at what you want to do from a procurement perspective, you want to look at yourself here as the buyer. And then you're looking at a marketplace that you're buying from. Okay? And so put yourself in the position of buyer, and then look at the internal marketplace for, let's say you're going to buy computers, laptops. All right. So, and for argument's sake, let's say your computer services here at McCombs, and your professors and students and that, you can buy laptops. So what you're going to do as the buyer, you're going to look at what's your relative bargaining power in the marketplace, and we'll get back to that in a second. First thing you do is you look into the marketplace and say, who are the players? Well, name me some players. You got Dell. Who else?
Apple.
HP. Lenovo. Microsoft is now in the, yes, they're now in the laptop business, absolutely. Good catch. Asus, Acer, and a handful of others, all right, smaller ones. Is there intense market competition? Oh, heck yes. Yeah, they beat each other up over 0.1% of market share. So yeah, it's highly, highly competitive. All right. If you're a supplier into that marketplace, generally speaking, is the supplier, what's the relative power of the suppliers selling into that marketplace? So let's think of a couple of big ones. Intel, right? Almost every one of those that you named has Intel chips, and even Apple has Intel chips in it now, all right? So what's this relative supplier bargaining power? Like if Dell is in this and they go into to negotiate with Intel, do they have any? Who's got the relative power in that negotiation? You think?
Intel.
Probably Intel. And understanding that's pretty important. But you could look at things like hard drives, right? Hard drives are dying. They're going away. So if you're Seagate, Western Digital, some of those kind of folks, and you're looking at selling into the marketplace, how much relative bargaining power do you think you have? I mean, you're gonna do anything you can do to get another 1,000 pieces of sales, right? It's highly leveraged to the advantage of the computer manufacturers now. Are there new entrants that you expect into the marketplace? Do you expect any new entrants to come in and sell you laptops? Microsoft. What about Google? Google had their
Chromebook.
Yeah, Chromebook. And so is that a legitimate competitor? Maybe. Depending upon what. Pressure from substitutes. What would be substitute for a laptop?
Tablet.
Tablets.
A desktop.
A desktop. Smartphone.
Yeah.
So yeah, are there substitutes that could threaten the stability of the marketplace if you're Dell, Apple, HP, Lenovo? Heck yeah. Absolutely. That's why you see Microsoft driving and both tablets and laptops, is to kind of beat away the pure tablet market, right? So yeah, it's a big deal. So understanding the relative, threat of new entrants, probably low. If you kind of do a low, medium, high. Threat from substitutes, maybe moderate. You know, supplier bargaining power on average, probably relatively low. You know, Intel might be the exception, but you know, relatively low. Buyer bargaining power. You know, if I'm going to go out and try to get a contract for a tech refresh that might be 5,000 or 8,000 laptops, do you think that HP, Lenovo, Dell, Apple, that I would get their attention with that? Oh, hell yeah. They'd be falling all over themselves. And so there's a pretty high level of buyer bargaining power here, because that's such, and that tends to happen when there's really deep internal competition. Then buying power tends to be in the hands, you know, the bargaining power tends to be in the hands of the buyer, because these guys are fighting over every scrap and trying to get that business. So, all right. So what goes along with this? So these are the 5 forces, right? Threat of new entrants, supplier bargaining power, buyer bargaining power, pressure for substitutes, and then the internal market competition. Those are the 5 forces acting on an industry. And then what you want to do is a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You could look at that either at the company level or at the industry level, and it tends to be internal or external. So the strengths and weaknesses are internal. The opportunities and threats are external. That's why, generally speaking, a SWOT analysis works best at a company level, but you can also do it at an industry level. But you think about, you know, what your strengths are versus your weaknesses. They tend to be, you know, a strength. You know, a strength is also, you know, is offset by a complementary weakness. Oftentimes, a strength plays off of an opportunity. A weakness tends to play off of a threat. You know, so there tends to be some kind of alignment there when you think about it. All right? I'll guarantee you that when you're doing this case competition, the Phillips 66 expectation is you will do a SWOT analysis and a Porter's 5 forces analysis on whatever industry they're asking you to buy. So they're gonna say, what's our, you know, what commodity are we buying? And maybe it's safety equipment, or maybe it's drill bits, or oil field services, or you name it, right? They're gonna expect drill bits. They're gonna expect you to do a Porter's 5 forces analysis on the drill bit industry. Who are the big players? What's the level of competition, et cetera? And then who are, you know, are there new entrants maybe coming into it? Are there substitutes? Are their suppliers strong? Do we have a bunch of little companies buying from a bunch of big companies? Or do we have a bunch of big companies buying from other big companies buying from a bunch of little companies? That's the kind of analysis you need to do. You need to be able to step back and kind of look at this is the 30,000-foot view. Way up in the clouds, kind of looking down on the landscape, understanding what's going on. And so we have, you know what, I'm going to stop there for a second. And I want to show you something else. I want to show you a market analysis. Because this is the other, if you'll remember that 7-step process. First step was a spend analysis. Next step was a market analysis. This is what a market analysis looks like. This is one of the best I have ever seen. And it is, this actually came to me from, again, from Halliburton, from a gig I did with them. And this, I don't know, they wouldn't tell me, so I don't know for certain how much this cost. But it's 23 pages or something, and if I had to guess, this is probably a $250,000 piece of analysis, right? So now, Phillips 66 isn't going to expect this out of you but this is the Holy Grail, right? I want you thinking about This is your standard for what it could look like. All right. So in this case, we're doing hydrochloric acid. All right. And we're looking at the industry for hydrochloric acid, trends and outlooks. So I want you paying attention to the key components of this analysis. So they did a glossary. They talked about their research methodology, the roadmap for research, did the market and risk analysis. So first glossary, we won't worry too much about that. Here's the methodology. They did secondary information, which would be what you will be expected to do, right? Which is to go reliable sources, internet. I wouldn't say Wikipedia fits in that, but real research. Going into the library, going to the internet in the library, academic journal articles, legitimate news, Fortune, Wall Street Journal, Economist, Financial Times, that kind of stuff. Those are legitimate secondary sources. Primary sources would be actually talking to the companies, talking to the suppliers. You won't have that opportunity. Should you go work for Phillips 66 someday, their expectation is you would actually go out and interview the suppliers and get a sense from them on what's going on. That's your primary information. For purposes of anything you would do in my class or on this case competition, secondary is about as far as you're going to go. Okay? And then you pull it together in a final report. The roadmap, client needs, industry needs, pricing analysis, and a supply chain risk analysis. So this gets down to this idea that the client was really interested in high purity hydrochloric acid, and they wanted to make sure, they were just clarifying this is what we're studying. On the industry basis, this is how we did our industry analysis, secondary sources, and then the pricing analysis. They use different market drivers, constraints, and looked at related industries. And then the supply chain analysis, you'll see here in a second, is one of the best I've ever seen, which is one of the reasons I love this particular thing. I use it in class every semester. So what we're doing here is taking a look at both the supply and the demand. They do an overview of the market. They talk about the supply. And so I won't read all of this, but it's produced in about 40 processes, consumed in about 110 different processes. You can see 20% went to the merchant market, 20-30% consumed in high purity product, 5 to 10% worked in pharmaceuticals. On the supply side. It talks about where it comes from and so on. So here's the interesting part of this. Here's the demand side. The demand side, they use hydrochloric acid in oil well drilling, steel pickling, food processing, and pharmaceuticals. The market trend in oil well drilling is up, and the impact is pretty high. 3 out of 4 pieces of pie. It's up in steel pickling as of 2011, I think this was, right? Up in steel pickling, moderate effect. Food processing up, moderate effect. Pharmaceutical up, but nominal effect. Right? The demand scenario overall is, high, medium, low, high. Right? So up in that 3/4 up. So that's the demand side. The supply side, or the production side, you create hydrochloric acid out of the TDI, MDI industry. I don't know what that is, but if you did the work, you would know what that was. Chlorine burning, fluorocarbons of pipelines disruption. So this is the supply side. The market trend on the supply side here is down, and it's a huge impact on the market. Chlorine burning is up, big impact. Fluorocarbons is down, big impact, and pipelines disruption is pretty moderate. So the production scenario is really low. Right off the bat, do you see a problem? Right? Demand up, supply down. Oops. All right? So, my students, would this be a supply or demand-constrained environment?
Supply.
This would be a supply-constrained environment. Yes. Excellently done. All right. So then we we get into the more expanded discussion of what we just talked about. I won't read through all of these, but you can, here are the market drivers. The TDI, MDI industry, all right? The fluorocarbons industry, the chlorine burners. This is the text. This is the text behind this stuff, right? So that's the supporting text to match up with this. The parallel industry dynamics. So this is on the demand side. Oh, pardon me. That's the text that supports this, and then so we start looking at, all right, what's going on with pricing? You can see it stayed really stable, and we anticipate a big jump. So we got historical and forecast. Here's our historical. There's our forecast. And so they've got a source, and they cite the source. Remember that. If you have, because I'll guarantee you, as someone who's been a chief procurement officer, I can tell you if you came in and said, this is what's happening with pricing, this is a forecast, and I would say, great, where'd you get those numbers? Well, we just sort of we did a forecast. And no. Or I don't know, we found it on the internet. Wikipedia? What? So I will not trust your word. It's not that I don't trust you, but I won't trust your word. I want the word of experts, and I want you to tell me who those experts were. Right? So cite anything you use in something like this. Cite the source. So we're anticipating a hydrochloric acid supply shortage. Is the bottom line there. And so we start talking about, all right, what are the risks in our supply chain? Well, we got a supply crunch risk. Here's how we would mitigate that. Quality issues, here's how we would mitigate that. Price hikes, here's how we would mitigate those. Right? So for every risk, we've got a mitigation strategy and a series of mitigation strategies. And then you get into, here's what the structure looks like. The supply side, the demand side, and the balance between those two. Here's the demand scenario. So that first part was the executive summary. This is now we're diving deep into the detail, right? So the kind of thing that I would expect you to do in a case competition or in my class is more along these 7 or 8 pages, right? These 3 or 4 pages actually. I would expect in my class. Maybe not this, but so similar to this, right? A high-level summary page saying, here's the demand side, here's the supply side, here's what we see impacting prices and availability, and here's what we anticipate going on. Here's the background of that. Here's the trends that we see in pricing. I could see having another graph. If I were doing this, I would have another graph saying anticipated supply to go along with that, maybe even on that same graph, a 2-line graph or something. And then there's a summary level on supply chain risk. So then you get into, now here's the detail. And this is all the same information, just diving a layer or 2 deeper. More of the demand scenario. You can see here, this is where the demand is going, pharmaceuticals, oil well, etc. And then here's the supply outlook. Here's how we come up with this stuff. Then we get into the demand outlook. This is what's going on in oil well acidizing, this is Halliburton paid for this, so that's always number 1, because that's what they're using it for. Steel pickling, food processing. This is the demand. This is what's driving the demand for each of those things. And then we do the risk analysis, talk about supply chain risk. I love this slide. If you did something like this, assuming they want you to do a market analysis, you did something like this for Phillips 66, they would love you too. All right? So here's likelihood and impact, right? And so feedstock price fluctuation is a marginal impact and a low likelihood. Right? Technological changes to reduce hydrochloric acid supply is a marginal impact, but there are changes going on that could impact this, right? Plant and pipeline maintenance, as far as what's going on in the industry, a pretty possible likelihood and a critical impact. An economic slowdown would have a severe impact, and it's possible. All right, an inventory shortage, severe impact, unlikely. A natural disaster would be catastrophic, and it's rare. Would make sense. Generally speaking, if you're talking about the 48 contiguous states, a natural, like earthquake or whatever, it's going to be here. But if you had a hydrochloric acid plant, a critical plant that was located in Indonesia, Japan, someplace on the Ring of Fire in the Pacific where you get earthquakes all the time, this would be more like up here, right? You'd start getting into the possible range, which, as you can see, it becomes a problem. Look up here. An increase in parallel demand segments, meaning we got two areas of demand that go up at the same time. That will cause a critical to severe impact as far as the availability of hydrochloric acid. And it's certain. It's going to happen. We know that's going to happen. Oh, crap, is what that's saying, right? And then you look at, if we have a manufacturing activity slowdown in the production, that's what's happening. Manufacturing slowdown in the production of hydrochloric acid, that's catastrophic, and it's certain to happen. This is beyond oh crap, right? This is why they paid for this study. That thing right there, right? So this is their documentation to say we need to do something, and we don't need to do it now. We needed to do it 3 months ago, but let's get started as soon as we can. So this is the kind of slide that can really send a strong message. If you're talking about doing a sourcing and saying this is why we need to, we've got this our current supplier for XYZ commodity is located on the Ring of Fire, and this now is up here somewhere. It's beyond possible. It's into the likely mode for a catastrophic natural disaster. Then, a chart like this is a great way of saying, so what we're going to do is have a secondary supplier located in a different part of the world. Even if we have to pay more, we're going to have that other supplier so that it's down in here, right? So we've got offsetting risk profiles. That's how you use this sort of slide. Make sense? Cool? All right. And then you can get into more of these, for every one of these things, every one of these risks, you have a mitigation strategy to address those. And then the rest is that. All right? What do you think? Isn't that I look at this document and I go, man, I'd love to be that good that I could do that. So these guys they're hot stuff. I mean, they did a great job with this. So I can make that available. And I've got a couple of others that we won't go over them here, but I can give you a couple of others. You should be in a situation like this with Phillips 66. You should be conversant with the concept of a market analysis. Porter's Five Forces, SWOT analysis is your starting point. Then you get into the kinds of things we talk here. What's happening on the supply side? What's happening on the demand side? What's happening with prices? What are the main drivers of prices? Who are the big players in the marketplace? What's going on with risk? How do we mitigate that risk? Those are all the kinds of questions you should be addressing and hopefully answering in your market analysis. The reason I harp on this is I'll go back 5 or 6 years when we had a guy at Phillips 66 named Robert Thomas. Diana knows him well. Peach of a guy, outstanding supply chain professional. And they were one of the first key executive sponsors in our supply chain center. And they've hired a ton of our supply chain graduates over the years. They came in one time and said, we love you guys, but and you present better the McCombs graduates present better than any other school's graduates. You guys have this thing knocked. But we're worried that you're not particularly quantitative. You don't know how to do a spend analysis. I had a spend analysis, right? And your market analyses are really thin. They're really light. So we need to do 2 major changes. I would say 2 full weeks of content into my procurement class came from that conversation with Robert Thomas about spend analysis and market analysis. And I can tell you that if you knock those 2 things, that plays really hard into what it is that Phillips 66 is looking for in a procurement professional. Fair enough? Okay. Let's get rid of this. And I'm almost talked out. And I can see you guys, your eyes rolling into your head, so I think that's I'm going to close with this. This idea of portfolio analysis. So I'm going to show you this. But I'll show you that I've got this. All right. So we have value potential and the complexity or risk of impact. Right. So this is all this is all important. But I'm going to show you that the slide deck that I'm handing is here's strategy development and so on. But here are the things. Here are the backup slides for that one slide. Has about 10 backup slides. So we can talk about critical commodity and what you do with it. And here are the actions you should take, a routine commodity, and the actions and a leverage commodity and so on. All right? So we're going to talk about it now, but the slides backing it up are part of this package, and you'll get all those. Okay? So let's actually, here's what we're going to do. If I can find that. We'll do this a little bit differently than I was planning to do it. And I will.
Right behind your laptop.
All right, so I'm going to just draw this. So we've got bottleneck commodity, and critical commodity, and leverage commodity, and routine commodity. And so we've got the value is low to high, right? And then the complexity, and this is high, low. All right? So now I can switch out of that. I'll go back to this. We'll go to this. So if we think about these different kinds of commodities, bottleneck, critical, routine, and leverage. Let's think about what this means. If we have a routine commodity, then it's low in value. Either we don't buy very many of them, or what we buy is really cheap. And then the complexity is really low. So, for instance, number 2 pencils, copy paper, Big Chief tablets, file folders, manila folders, not complex at all, right? And in the big scheme of things, really cheap. So spending a lot of time, even though we may spend a fair amount of money on office supplies, the value, the relative value to the organization is pretty low, right? So you're not going to spend a ton of time on this. Then you get in, but you could have what's called a bottleneck commodity, where we're not spending much on this, but the complexity is fairly high. Like maybe we're only buying a couple. So maybe we're not spending a ton of money, but the impact on what we're spending it on, or where we use that, is huge. So things like drill bits on offshore drilling platforms, right? A drill bit on an offshore drilling platform, a couple $1,000, right? A couple $1,000 per drill bit, and which seems like kind of a lot, but when you figure, you know, you're generating somewhere north of $2 million worth of revenue every day that oil well is pumping out in the Gulf of Mexico. So if the drill bit, if your drill bit fails, and you know, then you know, all of a sudden your oil well is shut down, and so it's the kind of thing where you go, well, do I really, you know, if you go out there and say, hey, I went out and I negotiated drill bits and I got from $2,000 per drill bit down to $1,800, I saved $200 per drill bit. They go, great. If it's no good and it fails, or if you have an unreliable supplier and they don't deliver, and you shut down my offshore drilling platform for a day because your supplier, to save $200, missed a shipment, all of a sudden those $200 savings pale in comparison to the $2 million worth of lost revenue. So that's a bottleneck supplier. So you know, and so you can start saying these critical suppliers or critical commodity. It's the kind of thing where you're looking at you know, big dollars. You know, so you got, you know, high value, high impact and complexity. Dell negotiating with Intel, right? There's only one Intel, and maybe you can buy an AMD, but AMD doesn't have the capability to supply the volume for Dell. So, you know, the microprocessor is the #1 most expensive thing in the laptop, and Intel is that supplier, and you better make sure that they are on board, right? And so you can see as we go through here the different kinds of things that we're going to do with that. So let's take a look. So critical commodity, it's critical profitability, critical to operations. We've got a few qualified sources of supply, AMD, Intel, right? Large expenditures, design and quality are critical. All of these things are adding up, right? And really complex, really rigid specifications, right? You ever spec'd out a microprocessor? It is big time, right? I used to be in the semiconductor business, you know, selling equipment to Intel. I mean, they bring the anal to analysis, right? So they are, you know, and they are an extraordinarily successful company because of it. But if you're Dell, you got to make sure, you know, that you've got things in order here. So you got to have a partnership with these guys, right? You know, Intel, Dell, partners, baby. Love you, man. All right. What can I do to make you happy? You know that, and you know, those are the, you know, those are deep strategic. You got to really get them involved in your business. You get involved in their business. You're strategic suppliers. You're just one thing short of being a joint venture. You really get aligned, right? Then you end up a lot of times in heavy negotiation that can be contentious, but you get into long-term contracts if you can. Really work with them on improving their processes, making sure you've got contingency plans. If they're, you know, usually you've only got a few suppliers, so you've got to make sure that, you know, if that they have more than one plant. So, you know, Intel makes their key microprocessors in multiple locations around the world. So if one plant goes down, if there's an earthquake or a tornado or whatever in one plant, they've got another plant that at least can keep going for a while. You know, so you've got to make sure you've got all these contingency strategies going on. Really got to know the market, and you really have to focus on, here are the specifications for what we want. We're not going to tell you how to build that, because Intel, you're the expert on making microprocessors. As Dell, what I will tell you, this is what we want your microprocessor to do in very excruciating detail. Now, Intel, please make sure that you, the expert, you are so great at You're so great at microprocessors. We really respect the heck out of you. You're a partner. Love you, man. Right? But we need you to do all of these things. And, we're not going to tell you how to make it because you do that better than anybody. But here's what we need it to do, and very detailed about that. So really got to be focusing on the specs is really important. So that routine commodity, which is down here. Lots of alternative products and services, lots of sources of supply, low value, small individual transactions, everyday use, number 2 pencils, Be Cheap tablets, copy paper, you name it, right? So the issue in negotiating office supplies isn't about whether I can save a half a penny on this number 2 pencil over the other guy. It's how do I make it so that I never have to worry about office supplies again. Here's a cabinet. I want these 9 things, and I want it always to be full. Now, it's your job to manage that and make sure that it's always full. Right? Now, I never have to worry about office supplies again. I never have to do a purchase order for office supplies. The focus becomes how do I reduce the transaction on doing office supplies. You handle it. All right, so that's the routine commodity. We talked about that. All right, we did all that. So leverage commodity is down here. High expenditures, but it's large marketplace. So it's buying oil. It's buying coils of steel. It's buying, if you're in the construction industry, it's buying gravel. It's buying concrete. It's buying rebar for making roads. It's buying asphalt, etc. All right, so it's very much commodity based. Lots of places where you can buy this stuff. It's market sensitive, so you're going to start you're going to start looking at concentrating your business to 2 or 3 suppliers and then making them compete with one another for who gets the biggest percentage of your business. You're going to focus on tying prices to market cycles. Maybe you tie your pricing to here's your index. You're going to price everything according to West Texas crude oil and say if oil prices go down for West Texas crude by more than 5%, then we're going to go in and renegotiate the price. Or that you're going to tie it to an index because you're not a big enough player in the marketplace to drive the index, but you may be a big enough player in the marketplace to ride the index. So that maybe instead of negotiating a particular price, you say, whatever the index price is, I want 1% below that. And so what you're negotiating is not a price, you're negotiating an advantage in the marketplace. So if the rest of your competition is buying at the index and you're buying at 1% below the index, you've got an instant advantage in the marketplace. It's that kind of thinking, okay? Very much commodity based. And then the bottleneck commodity, complex specs, very few alternatives, big impact on operations. Maybe it's one new part, or it's one design part that there's only one company that can make it, or it's new technology. So it's all about finding alternatives so that like for instance, a classic example for this sort of thing would be a patented drug. Right? So the only place you can get that drug is from that supplier because they have the patent on it. Well, then what you want to do is try to find alternatives that do the same thing or close to the same thing. Even if it's not exactly the same drug. Same. You get what I'm saying here? All right. So, and I think that's pretty much it. Widen specs so you can do different things. The idea is to get new suppliers. You want to increase your competition. Okay, that's that. We're out of time, but basically what you just got is the first 3 weeks of the procurement class in 2 hours. I feel reasonably comfortable that you've got at least some foundation work to make something happen. All right. So if the rest of this, you might get into some discussion about contract language. That's a possibility. In slides, I really can't convey anything about contract language that's going to be helpful to you. I don't think, not without a discussion about it. But I think the key here is that alignment of strategy. Understand what your corporate strategy is. So part of the discussion with Phillips 66 will be to say, what's their corporate strategy regarding procurement? What's their position in the marketplace? And so whatever strategy we do at the commodity level needs to be supportive of that approach. So if they're saying, we want to be high growth, we want to be on every street corner with a new Phillips 66 station, we're going after volume, then that's going to be different than saying, we want to secure our place in the marketplace, we want to lower our costs, we want to be the high-value producer of these goods. That's going to be a different strategy. You're going to be focused more on fewer suppliers at lower cost, that's that kind of thing. So strategy alignment's important. And then the two big issues, number one, make sure you do your spend analysis. Number two, do a great market analysis. And I think if you do that, then I think you're going to be in a position to be really competitive in that case competition.